The room smelled of cigarette smoke and wet wool, the kind of smell that clung to men who had not slept properly in weeks. It was early December 1944, somewhere in northern France, and outside the walls of Allied headquarters, the wind cut through trees like a blade. Maps covered the tables. Red and blue pins marked towns most people had never heard of. Somewhere far to the east, German artillery was already being dragged into position, though almost no one in this room truly believed it yet. If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below. At this exact moment, while senior commanders debated logistics and politics, thousands of American soldiers were about to be thrown into one of the bloodiest surprises of the war. And the man who might have seen it coming, the man who lived for moments like this, was not in charge. George S. Patton was standing on the sidelines, waiting, furious, and unheard. You can almost feel the tension if you imagine standing there. The war had been going on for years. Normandy was behind them. Paris was free. Everyone wanted to believe the end was close. Yet the truth was darker. The decision about who would command the Allied armies in Europe had already been made, and it would shape everything that followed. Dwight D. Eisenhower wore the title of Supreme Commander. George Patton never would. This was not an accident. It was not a simple oversight. It was a deliberate choice, and that choice would cost lives. To understand why Patton was never given supreme command, you have to go back, long before the beaches of Normandy, to a time when the war was still being planned on paper. In 1942, the United States was new to the global war in Europe. The British had been fighting for years. Though they were tired, experienced, cautious. The Americans were confident, ambitious, and often reckless. At the center of this clash stood Patton, already famous for his sharp tongue, polished helmet, and obsession with speed and aggression. He believed wars were won by attacking hard, attacking fast, and never letting the enemy breathe. It was not a theory to him. It was a religion. Patton had proven himself early. In North Africa, in late 1942 and early 1943, he took over a broken American force after disaster at Kasserine Pass. Morale was low. Discipline was poor. Patton moved fast. He imposed strict rules, replaced weak officers, and pushed his men forward with relentless pressure. Within weeks, American units that had been humiliated were fighting back with confidence. British commanders noticed. German commanders noticed too. His reputation grew quickly, and so did his ego. But even then, warning signs appeared. Patton spoke without filters. He insulted allies. He mocked caution. He publicly criticized anyone who slowed him down. To Patton, hesitation was a sin. To political leaders and coalition planners, hesitation was sometimes necessary. The war in Europe was not just a military campaign. It was a fragile alliance between nations with different goals, different fears, and long memories. Supreme command required more than battlefield brilliance. It required diplomacy. Eisenhower understood this better than anyone. He had not risen through the ranks because he was the best field commander. He rose because he could manage people. He listened. He negotiated. He absorbed criticism and gave credit freely. British leaders trusted him. American politicians trusted him. Even when generals disagreed with him, they believed he was fair. In a coalition war, that mattered more than personal glory. Patton, on the other hand, frightened politicians. He frightened allies. He even frightened some of his own officers. His speeches were brutal. His language was crude. He talked openly about killing the enemy without mercy. For soldiers in combat, this could be inspiring. For newspapers back home, it was dangerous. For presidents and prime ministers, it was a liability. The moment that sealed Patton's fate came in August 1943 in Sicily. The campaign was nearly over. American and British forces had taken the island, but the cost had been high. In a field hospital near Nicosia, Patton visited wounded soldiers. He expected to see men injured in battle. Instead, He encountered a private suffering from what doctors called battle fatigue. Today, we would call it combat stress. The soldier had no visible wounds. Patton exploded. He shouted. He slapped the man. He accused him of cowardice. Weeks later, it happened again at another hospital. The news reached Eisenhower. It reached Washington. It reached the press. The public reaction was swift and angry. Soldiers were heroes. Wounded men were not to be humiliated. Eisenhower faced a choice. He could protect Patton completely, or he could show that no one was above discipline. He chose the second path. Patton was forced to apologize publicly. He was removed from command for months. In that moment, Patton's chance at supreme command died quietly. Eisenhower never said it openly, but the message was clear. And Patton could not be trusted with the political weight of supreme command. The war was not only about defeating Germany, it was about maintaining unity among allies and keeping public support at home. Patton was too unpredictable. Yet here is where the story becomes painful, because while Patton sat sidelined, the war did not slow down. In fact, it grew more dangerous. In June 1944, the Allies landed in Normandy. Eisenhower commanded from above. Montgomery led the British ground forces. Patton, officially, commanded nothing. Unofficially, he commanded fear. The Germans believed Patton was leading the main invasion force aimed at Pas-de-Calais. His reputation was so strong that the Allies used him as a decoy, placing him in command of a fake army on paper. German intelligence took the bait. And when Patton finally entered the real fight in France in August 1944, he did exactly what he always did. He moved fast. He broke out of Normandy. His Third Army raced across France, covering ground at a speed few thought possible. Towns fell one after another. German units collapsed under the pressure. Patton pushed his supply lines to the breaking point, demanding fuel and ammunition with relentless urgency. This was Patton at his best. Aggressive, focused, deadly. He believed the Germans were beaten and that only bold action stood between the Allies and final victory. He argued constantly with Eisenhower and other commanders, demanding more fuel so he could keep advancing. He believed every pause gave the enemy time to recover. But Eisenhower had to think bigger. He had to balance British and American priorities. He had to ensure supply lines stayed intact. He had to protect flanks. He chose a broad front advance instead of Patton's narrow, deep thrust. It was a safer strategy on paper. It was also slower. By autumn 1944, the opportunity to end the war early was slipping away. German forces regrouped. New defensive lines formed. Winter approached. Patton sensed danger. He believed the Germans were not finished. He warned that the enemy was capable of a major counterattack. Others were less convinced. Intelligence reports were mixed. Many believed Germany lacked fuel, men, and morale for anything large. Then came December 16th, 1944. Before dawn, German artillery erupted along the Ardennes. Snow fell. Fog rolled through the forests. American units, thinly spread and unprepared, were hit hard. The Battle of the Bulge had begun. It would become the largest and bloodiest battle fought by American forces in the war. In those first hours, chaos ruled. Communications broke down. Units were surrounded, roads clogged with refugees and retreating troops. Eisenhower faced the greatest crisis of his command, and in that moment he turned to Patton. Patton was ready. He always was. Within hours, he proposed a daring plan to pivot his entire army north to relieve the besieged town of Bastogne. On December 19, 1944, in a tense meeting at Verdun, Patton stunned the room by announcing he could attack within 3 days. Many doubted him. He did it anyway. Patton's counterattack helped save Bastogne. His troops fought through snow and ice, often without proper winter gear. Casualties were heavy. The victory was real, but it was not clean. Thousands died, and thousands more were wounded or captured. The battle dragged on for weeks. And this is where the question becomes impossible to ignore. What if Patton had been in supreme command from the beginning? What if his warnings had been taken more seriously? What if his aggressive instincts had shaped the Allied strategy earlier, before winter, before the Germans had time to strike back? Supporters of Patton argue that a faster, more decisive push in late summer 1944 could have broken Germany before the Ardennes offensive ever happened. They point to missed opportunities, cautious pauses, and political compromises that slowed the advance. They argue that Eisenhower's broad front strategy spread Allied power too thin and allowed the enemy to survive longer than necessary. Critics respond that Patton's style, while effective tactically, could have caused disaster at the strategic level. A deep thrust without secure flanks could have been cut off. Supply lines could have collapsed. Allied unity could have fractured under the strain of Patton's personality. They argue that Eisenhower's steady hand kept the alliance together and ultimately won the war. Both sides have evidence. Both sides have graves to point to. Patton never stopped believing he was right. In private diaries, he wrote bitterly about being held back. He believed politics, not military logic, had denied him supreme command. He believed lives were wasted because caution replaced boldness. Yet he also understood, at least on some level, why the decision had been made. Supreme command required restraint. Patton was not a restrained man. As the war dragged into 1945, Patton continued to fight with ferocity. His troops crossed the Rhine. They pushed deep into Germany. They liberated camps and captured cities. The end came in May. Victory celebrations followed. But Patton was restless. He saw new enemies forming. He spoke carelessly again. Once more, his words alarmed superiors. In December 1945, months after the war ended, Patton died in a car accident in Germany. He never wore the title of Supreme Commander, the debate over whether he should have never ended. And maybe it never will. Because the story of why Patton was never given supreme command is not just about one man. It is about the kind of war this was. A war fought not only with tanks and rifles, but with alliances, politics, and public opinion. A war where brilliance could win battles, but balance was needed to win everything else. The argument did not end when the guns went quiet. In fact, it grew louder after victory, when men finally had time to look back and ask hard questions. In the months following Germany's collapse, senior officers met in quiet rooms, far from cameras, replaying decisions again and again. They asked whether the war in Europe could have ended sooner, whether fewer men might have died, and whether the refusal to place George S. Patton in supreme command had shaped the final year of fighting more than anyone wanted to admit. By late summer 1944, the Allies stood at a crossroads. Paris had been liberated on August 25th. German forces were retreating in disorder. Fuel shortages plagued the Wehrmacht. Many German units were filled with teenagers and older men. To Patton, this was the moment to gamble everything, and he believed the enemy was cracking, not bending. Every delay, in his mind, was a gift to Germany. He argued that a concentrated drive toward the Rhine, using his Third Army as the spearhead, could smash what remained of organized resistance before winter set in. But Eisenhower's view was shaped by scars the public never saw. He remembered the British collapse in France in 1940. He remembered how fast victories could turn into disasters when supply lines snapped. He also carried the weight of alliance politics every hour of every day. British commanders, especially Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, demanded equal priority. Giving Patton supreme command, or even supreme operational freedom, would have shattered that balance. The alliance might have survived, but it would have been wounded, and in a coalition war, wounded alliances were dangerous. You can almost feel the pressure Eisenhower lived under. Every major decision risked lives and relationships at the same time. Patton never had to carry that burden. He commanded armies. Eisenhower commanded nations. Still, the numbers haunt historians. In September 1944, Allied forces paused near the German border, waiting for supplies. Fuel trucks were diverted. Rail lines needed repair. During this pause, German engineers rebuilt bridges, dug defensive positions, and reorganised battered units. By October, the enemy was no longer in full retreat. They were digging in. Winter was approaching fast. Patton watched this happen with rising anger. His diary entries from this period are filled with frustration. He wrote about wasted time and lost chances. He believed the High Command was fighting the war they wanted, not the war that existed. He felt the enemy was being treated as weaker than they truly were. History would later show that Germany still had the strength to launch one final, desperate gamble. The Ardennes offensive was not just a battlefield surprise, it was a strategic shock. German planners chose the Ardennes precisely because Allied leaders believed it was unlikely. They counted on complacency. They counted on the belief that Germany could no longer mount a major attack. Patton did not share that belief. He had studied the terrain. He understood German thinking. He had used surprise himself too many times to ignore the possibility. When the attack came, the cost was immediate and brutal. American divisions were hit before they could fully react. In some units fought heroically, others were overwhelmed. Men froze in foxholes. Ammunition ran low. Medical evacuation was slow. The casualty lists grew day by day. Over 80,000 American soldiers would be killed, wounded, or captured by the time the battle ended. This is where the phrase, "the decision that cost lives," takes on real weight. If Patton had held supreme command, would the Ardennes have been defended more strongly? Would reserves have been placed differently? Would warnings have been acted on sooner? There are no perfect answers, only probabilities. What is certain is that Patton's ability to respond saved lives once the crisis began. His rapid shift north was not just impressive, it was essential. Without it, Bastogne might have fallen. The German timetable might have held. The war might have dragged on even longer. Yet Patton was still responding to a disaster, not preventing it. Critics of Patton often focus on his flaws, and there were many. He pushed men hard, sometimes too hard. He accepted high casualties as the price of speed. His belief in relentless attack could border on obsession. Some historians argue that if Patton had been supreme commander, his aggressive style might have caused catastrophic losses if a major gamble failed. But supporters counter that war itself is catastrophe, and prolonging it is its own form of failure. Every extra month meant more dead, more wounded, more civilians caught in the crossfire. They argue that Patton's brutality was honest. He never pretended war could be clean or gentle. He wanted it finished as fast as possible. Eisenhower, in contrast, believed the worst outcome would be a fractured alliance or a defeat caused by overreach. He had seen how politics and military reality intertwined. He feared that a single dramatic failure under Patton could have forced leaders in Washington or London to interfere more directly, slowing everything down. Stability, to Eisenhower, saved lives too, even if it did not look heroic on a map. The tragedy is that both men were probably right in different ways. Patton was built to fight wars. Eisenhower was built to manage them. The role of supreme commander required more of the second than the first. That reality doomed Patton's chances long before the final battles were fought. There is also an uncomfortable truth many avoid. Supreme command was not awarded solely on merit. It was shaped by image. Eisenhower projected calm, reliability, and restraint. He looked like the kind of man the public trusted with victory. Patton looked like a man made of sharp edges and fire. In a democracy fighting a global war, image mattered. Leaders needed generals who reassured families back home, not ones who frightened them. By early 1945, Germany was collapsing again. this time for good. Allied armies crossed the Rhine in March. Resistance was fierce in places, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. Patton's forces moved rapidly through central Germany, capturing key cities and thousands of prisoners. His operational brilliance was undeniable. Yet even now, no one suggested changing the command structure. The decision made years earlier remained final. After victory, Patton's frustrations deepened. He spoke openly about the Soviet Union. He criticized denazification policies. Once again, his words created problems. Once again, Eisenhower had to contain him. The pattern repeated itself right up to the end. Patton died believing he had been right and misunderstood. Eisenhower lived knowing he had made choices that others would question forever. History remembers both men, but in very different ways. Eisenhower is remembered as the steady architect of Allied victory. Patton is remembered as the brilliant, dangerous blade that was never fully unleashed. So did the decision to deny Patton supreme command cost lives, almost certainly. But so might the opposite decision have done. War does not offer clean comparisons. It offers only trade-offs, hidden costs, and regrets that surface decades later. What remains undeniable is that Patton represented a path the Allies chose not to take, a faster, riskier, a more violent path that might have shortened the war, or might have ended in disaster. Eisenhower represented caution, balance, and unity, even when that meant moving slower than some believed necessary. Standing at that crossroads in 1944, the Allies chose safety over speed. They chose stability over audacity. And thousands of men paid the price of that choice in snow-covered forests and ruined towns. As you picture those final months of the war, you can almost hear the engines idling, the boots crunching on frozen ground, the distant thunder of artillery. Somewhere behind the lines, Patton paced, restless, convinced the war could have been ended sooner. Somewhere above it all, Eisenhower weighed decisions that would shape history. The war ended. The debate did not. And maybe that is the real legacy of why Patton was never given supreme command. Not a single decision, but a reminder that victory is often built on compromises no one truly loves, and that even the right choice can leave behind a trail of ghosts who ask quietly, what might have been? If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below.